I promise I'll do my best.
Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a guide for Van Gogh. My condolences to the Dutch, but that's the only time I'm going to be pronouncing it like that. So with that said, let's Van go to the polls! She's a 5-star foreigner introduced back in Imaginary Scramble, and I'm embarrassed to say that when she came out on the JP server, I completely glossed her over. On paper, she seems like some sort of weird trait buffer without targeted charge, which in the past was the mark of a B-grade servant. But let me tell you something. This kit? It goes places. So sit tight. It's gonna get wild. First of all, let's talk about foreigners. They have class advantage against berserkers, pretenders, and other foreigners, while having disadvantage against alter egos. This makes them outstanding picks against berserkers in particular, since aside from Draco and Nero, they're the only servants with defensive class advantage against them. That resilience is going to play into Van Gogh's specialty, so keep that in the back of your head. Skill usage order is a matter of life or death for Van Gogh, so let's start with the one you use first, the Yellow House. It's written Het Gele Huis, but apparently that last word is just pronounced as house? I don't fucking know, man, Dutch is hard. This skill does a couple of things. It's an AoE defense and quick resistance debuff. It gives your party 1 hit of evasion and a small health regen. It also gives your party a 10-turn, 100 damage curse. Believe it or not, that curse drawback is one of the most important parts, second only to the evade. You follow this up with Soul of the Water Channels. This is a targeted attack and star absorption buff. Spoilers, you're putting it on Van Gogh. But regardless of your target, she gets an on-hit buff. Every time you use one of her quick cards, she removes a curse and gains a 3-turn attack buff. You'll have plenty of ammunition since it also redirects all curses on the field onto herself. This includes the ones you spread with the Yellow House, and it also includes any that your enemies might have. Seems like a nuisance, but you can turn it into your advantage with Void Space Art. It gives Van Gogh a pretty reasonable guts, 3k health. It also puts 3 more curse stacks on her, and here's the kicker. It then gives Van Gogh 10% charge for each curse on her. On turn 1, a single Van Gogh can gain 60% charge with this combo without any external help. So with a craft essence like Traces of Christmas's Past or a charge support like Scotty, that's an immediate noble phantasm. This brings us to the Sterre Nacht, the Starry Night. It applies fear to all enemies, a delayed stun that can trigger once over 3 turns. On the buff side, it grants 10 stars per turn and has an overcharge effect for an attack buff. It gives your party generic crit damage and gives even more crit damage to servants that are entities of the Outer Realm. This includes Summer BB, Mysterious Ranmaru X, Okita Soji, and every foreigner with 2 exceptions, Kukulkan and Nocnaria. Now looking at this, you may be tempted to treat Van Gogh as a support, but the problem is that most of the Outer Realm servants would much rather use help that accelerates their charge. And Van Gogh is quite an awkward fit in these setups. They also prefer double card type supports anyway. BB would much rather have double Koyan, Mysterious Heroine double X wants double Castoria, and the funniest anti-synergy is Jacques de Molay. Not only does she want double Scotty, but she'd very much like her curses to stay where they are. Now the true power is right under your nose. Van Gogh is a valid recipient for her own buffs, and she's an absolute terror with them. By using Van Gogh as a main attacker, you can spam the Starry Night, crit the shit out of your enemies, and build up enough charge to repeat the cycle. Once you hit terminal velocity, that crappy little fear effect becomes one of her most powerful tools. The delay actually becomes an asset because you can stack those clocks to your heart's content. You can throw one out while they're already stunned from a fear proc. This stun lock potential is absolutely terrifying, and the RNG element gets mitigated because Van Gogh has both the guts and an evade as fallback options. With max skills, those come off cooldown in 6-turn cycles, so you can keep opponents at bay indefinitely. Now you might be worried about getting chipped out over time, especially with all these curses flying around. Van Gogh's Curse of the Sunflower helps a bit on that front. It's a passive that stops her from taking lethal curse damage. She still takes damage, but she'll survive at 1 health. Now you still have to worry about enemy attacks, so it's not waterproof. Yeah, you can rely on her 3k guts, but I'd personally recommend using some heal codes like Holy Shroud of Lovers to keep her topped off. That particular code has the added benefit of removing defensive debuffs while leaving Van Gogh's curses intact. There's also Bride of the White Rose, which is a party heal. You'll see why that might come in handy a little later. The strategy is to run through Van Gogh's initial combo and then get her alone on the field as quickly as possible. You want bodies on the field for extra curse stacks, but then Brave Chains become your primary focus. There are 2 good ways of doing this. Either you can run Taunters, high-end supports like Scotty with Good Poster Girl or baked-in taunts like George, or you can run self-destructors like Habitrot. If you go the Habanyan route, you have to be extremely careful with your skill order because there's a lot of potential anti-synergy between the 2. Habitrot's 3rd skill needs to be the first thing you use because it removes all damage over time effects. And then her 1st skill needs to be the very last thing you use, after all of Van Gogh's effects. It grants debuff immunity, which is going to cause you some problems if you use it early. After Van Gogh is the last one standing, you can go with AQQ Chains to fish for charge. This is on the NA server, of course. On JP, you would be going for Mighty Chains instead to max out both charge and damage. QBA would be my recommendation since it lets you get her on hit proc first, do a little extra on her buster, and then get the most charge from her arts card. Mighty chains are a beautiful thing, and once we get them on this side of the Pacific, Van Gogh's only going to get stronger. Sounds pretty degenerate, right? Stun-locking, self-buffing Soloist? You want to know what's even filthier? Remember when I said that Van Gogh was a valid recipient of her own buffs? Well, there's absolutely nothing stopping you from using your own Van Gogh and then grabbing a second one off your friends list. Because of our bizarre kit, one of Van Gogh's most effective supports is, in fact, just another Van Gogh. Consider this. You know how the yellow house spreads 3 curses with a full frontline? Well, that immediately becomes 6. But you don't even need to do that. If one Van Gogh runs through a full combo, that's 6 stacks already on the field. There is absolutely nothing stopping your second pervert painter from just stealing those stacks with Soul of the Water channels and then using Void Space Art. This puts a total of 9 stacks on your second Van Gogh, meaning that with her basic charge append unlocked, level 1, she can NP with any craft essence. Which is pretty nice because Van Gogh has absolutely zero use for Black Grail, meaning that CE slot is your canvas. We'll get back to that a little later. The big benefit of Double Go is your Noble Phantasm access. You have way more control over when you use Starry Night. In a slow-going fight, you have the option of waiting for one to fully proc before sending out another to get value over time. In an explosive slugfest, you can send them out very close to each other. You might get screwed by RNG with a simultaneous proc, but you can also be rewarded with consecutive procs, stopping your target from retaliating while you build up another round of NPs. Not to mention that with 2 Starry Nights out, both Van Goghs are going to mangle your target with tremendous crits. This cocktail of disruption and damage means that in most situations where Van Gogh is a valid attacker, you don't even need to bother with a second Scotty. You can just use 2 Van Goghs and go to town. Hell, you don't even need a first Scotty, strictly speaking. Defensively, they each pack a party evade with the means to stall out until those come off cooldown, so you don't even need Skadoodle for that. For all her strengths, Van Gogh does have some vulnerabilities. She relies on debuffs, on evade, and guts to stay alive and keep enemies under control. Mechanics that nullify one or more of these pillars tend to make things very difficult for her. So in other words, you should be wary of Sure Hit, Invuln Pierce, debuff immunity, recurring cleanses, and above all, buff removal. Ironically, this makes fights like Argena Altar and Morgan borderline untenable for Van Gogh, despite her having class advantage against them. At least with the evasion counters, you can just roll the dice, so those aren't a total write-off. Against the other categories though, I'd pick something else. Now let's talk about min-maxing. If you want a huge burst in power, try and unlock Van Gogh's extra attack append. As a soloist/duelist, you'll have consistent access to Brave Chains and you'll want to exploit that reliability to the hilt. The faster you kill your target, the less you have to worry about Murphy's Law. For Mystic Codes, the Atlas uniform is going to provide you with an emergency invuln and the ability to reuse her skill combo 2 turns ahead of schedule. The cleanse effect has some anti-synergy, but it can bail you out of start of battle effects and also debuffs that stop you from playing the game. For craft instances, pretty much any 50% pick is going to work with a solo Van Gogh strategy. If you're running a duo though, you can pick options entirely around counterbuilding whatever gimmick you're up against. If there's an event CE, that's always fair game. Decapitating Bunny is a quick and invuln Pierce combo. It was a freebie from the Garden of Sinners event way back in the past. If you missed it, it gets added to the Mana Prism shop in the 8th anniversary update along with everyone's favorite Golden Sumo. Looking further into the future, the Ephemeral Ones is a freebie from Servant Summer Festival 2, packing a combo of quick NP gain and a star dump. Van Gogh has a slightly slow start without flat stars on turn 1, so getting that from somewhere is nice. Once she gets going, she can generate stars fine. My final recommendation is the Method to Walk on the Stars. This is a very interesting pick that amps damage against cursed enemies. Now the catch is that you're generally sucking curses onto Van Gogh, but if you're running a cursed command code, you can prime the pump when your 3rd skill is on cooldown. The good news is that it's a free CE. The bad news is that it's from the most recent JP event as of this recording, Wangina World Tour, so it's a long ways off in the future. Speaking of command codes, let's run through some useful branches. I've already talked about heal and curse codes, though with that latter category, I'd strongly recommend using the weakest ones so she doesn't take unnecessary damage. Some highlights include Bestial Talisman from the recent Summer Adventure event, Paintbrush of the Train, which applies the curse directly onto Van Gogh, Heal Princess is from the future Tamlin Cup event and has a health absorption event, letting it fill both the curse and sustain rolls. Finally, TikTok Bomb is going to come out in Valentine's 2025 and has Defense Ignore. For other bypass effects, you can run Fine Sword for Invuln Pierce, and Vajra that annihilates Desire for a more current means to get around high defense buffs. Lastly, consider buff removal codes if your target likes to spam a particular type, attack, crit damage, and so on. The Van Gogh lock is one of the most terrifying strategies in the game, and having access to it, while it's not strictly necessary for a well-rounded account, it is quite fun and effective at what it does. Well worth the price of admission. But that begs the question, how many Van Goghs should you roll for? The good news is that, for the overwhelming majority of scenarios, NP1 is plenty. But if you want to go further, there are 2 benefits. Firstly, your NP level determines how big your general, non-Outer Realm crit buff is. Going from NP1 to 2 grants her an extra 25%, which is pretty nice. It also lets her sit on over 100% charge, which is nice for those rare fights where you get a little drain every turn. Diminishing returns are pretty brutal after NP3 though, so I wouldn't go further than that unless you're in the business of dick waving. Thanks for watching. Hope you found this useful. Drop a like if you did, subscribe for more, and come watch me at twitch.tv/Finotaisen where I stream. This week I'll be going almost every day. Elden Ring on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and Fate Samurai Remnant on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. There's a big sub discount going on, so if you want to support me that way, I'd certainly appreciate it. 3 p.m. Pacific time. I'll see you there.